So today we're going to try to hang out with the more quieter animals.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe you guys will catch the baby goats.
Catch what we have to say. So our topic today is feeding your homestead livestock off of your property and through the winter off of your property, I guess is how I would say that. Growing our own feed for our animals for year-round feeding. Maybe that's a better way to say it. But so this is something that we've kind of been looking into. Usually we look for a topic that comes through our feed throughout the week, and then we talk about it, and it's kind of our topic of conversation all week long, and then we bring it to you guys. But honestly, this week there wasn't much of that.
Nothing's really been dropped in our laps this week.
No, but this is something that I've mildly been obsessing about since I bought the property, because this is not your typical homesteading property. This is a mountain. So it's not like I could just have a huge pasture, try to grow my hay for my animals for the winter, and become less reliant on commercial feeds and having to purchase hay. 'Cause one thing that I noticed when I was researching this was that the price of gas, so the price of fuel, and the price of seeds have skyrocketed this year, which makes sense. The seeds I can see. But anyway, farmers are not planting hay because they can't afford to plant hay.
Yeah.
Which means there's going to be less hay this year to sell.
Price increase.
So the price is going to skyrocket.
That's teamed up with the fact that we've heard in the news about egg layer feed causing chickens to not really lay eggs.
And I was reading this thing about a lady she bought a milk cow, and it was pretty underfed, which really could come with the lack of feed. And I know that there's skyrocketing heat. The temperatures are really hot across the south. There's a lot of hay produced in those areas, so I know there's probably going to be a struggle for even growing for those people who have decided to grow.
Yeah.
So what can we do now? This is the scary part, is there's not much we can do in our area for this year other than foraging. So we can forage, we can open up space. I just did a walkabout of the fence line, which you should be doing on a regular basis, and I don't. In all honesty, you guys, I just don't. But I did this morning, and as I was looking on the other side of the fence, it's really thick, it's really plush. Like we could start maybe trying to release the goats on the days we don't leave the farm.
And this morning we did walk around and cut down plants and feed from the land.
Well, you do that on a daily basis.
On a regular, yeah.
Kim does that on a daily basis. I do it every now and then if she's super busy.
We're a pretty good team, you know. You pick up something.
So I knew that when we were talking about doing the rabbits, we talked about that would be a way we could feed them in the colony, because they will get in their space. All the animals are the same. They'll get in their locked in space, and they will forage everything in that space, so you only have dirt.
Yeah.
I don't think I've really been to a farm that has a paddock near their barn where animals are housed on a regular that actually has stuff growing in it. So the way I did it in Washington, of course, I bought my land. I got super excited. I hadn't had critters in a while, so I got all the critters. Then I started rescuing like not llamas, but alpacas that were needed rescuing. So I ended up with a lot, like 15 alpacas. I had like a 3-acre, I would say, area, just guessing. It could have been closer to 2. So it got overgrazed very quickly, and then I was spending about $1,500 a month in feed. It was ridiculous, the amount of feed up between hay and grain.
Yeah, wow.
So when I rehomed a bunch and put a bunch in freezer camp is what ended up happening with the critters that I had. And pared down to a small herd of sheep. I think I had 5 sheep and I had 4 goats. And then the chickens that were around the birds that I had just a small amount. And then I heavily seeded that area, and I divided it into 4 pens so I could start my rotational grazing. That is the only time that I have had grass growing, feed growing in areas that animals were housed.
Yeah.
For the time, that's the only time I've had it.
That's the only way I can think of that you would have to do it.
Because you have to get them off of the property. You have to get them out of that space, because they will just continue to forage it until you can't. Now we have some things that they will eat, and we have some things that they will only eat if they're really hungry.
Very true. We have one particular plant that nobody seems to really like, but they'll eat it if there's
nothing else.
Low.
Yeah. So we're planning for next year. We're going to do everything that we can to make it through winter with the animals that we have right now. One of my starting into this was the planning on what animals I wanted to have, what I wanted to overwinter. So when I was looking at sheep, I wanted meat, I wanted milk, and I wanted high birth rates, so multiples. Because if I'm housing, let's just say I'm housing 2 ewes and a ram, so they would be a minimum of 3 over winter. So now I've only got 3 over winter. Well, if those 2 ewes have triplets, if they're bred to have multiple, so triplets, quads, pretty regular if you get the some particular breeds. And honestly, I really may travel to pick up out of state, because so the Romanovs they have quads. They have 4, they have 6 babies. It's pretty regular with that breed.
Wow.
That is a breed that you use to grow your herd. Well, so their meat, they're not fiber.
Okay.
So the ones that we have right now are for fiber and meat and milk. But if you bring in that, and you bring that into your ewe line, right? So you're going to get more milk, because they're going to produce more milk for their lambs. So if you're milking, there you go. But you're only housing the 3. And then you could end up with 8 babies.
And if you're really wanting them for food, that's a great way of doing it. If you're into it more for the fiber, of course you'd make different options. But for food, that's awesome.
Exactly. And then they're on the ground when you also have to really focus on when you want your animals to give birth. So they're pretty much on milk the first 3 months. They'll start grazing. Like these baby goats are starting to graze a little bit, but nothing to put a dent in anything. So that 3 months, it's okay to have them in your barn, as long as you can get them out of the cold or out of the wind, usually is the problem. So end of season. So we've really been trying to figure out, when do we want to breed everybody, the other goats, the remaining goats. Obviously the sheep aren't old enough to be bred this young, so we wouldn't breed them until later. But so those babies are hitting the ground, let's just say in February, which really is our coldest month. So we gotta really think about that. You got to be able to have some heat lamps and that kind of thing going, which is a little difficult for us because we're off grid. So, so really trying to figure that aspect out. But then they're in your barn while you're having to bring in feed or feed them with stuff that you have stored at their youngest age, where they're not making a dent in it. So, and then once the green all starts coming out, that's when everybody's foraging and they're eating the most, so that you have the least amount of money into them.
Most free feed.
Right. So there's that aspect, number 1. And number 2, we are adding a pasture here behind us in the garden area. It'll be about, I think it's 130 by 200, that will be heavily seeded with stuff that I'm hoping we can, what I'm wanting to do, my goal for this, long-term goal for this, is to be able to move them out and let them graze the mountain while that's growing, and then I can start cutting that down and haying it. And that gives me feed for, so it's still a garden area because it's growing food for the animals.
And we were talking about, there's some beets, the mango beets?
Yeah, so let's go into that. There were some things, because we were talking about what could we grow.
Right.
Now for us, we're limited water. We haul in our water. It's not limited water, we haul our water in. So
eventually we'll have rain collection.
Yes. and hopefully I would like to have like 20,000 gallons off of both buildings.
Right.
So once the barndominium's up and the barn's up, that could give 40,000 gallons of water here. So we would be able to water and grow whatever we wanted.
Plus, if we do the animal shelters right, then we
Mhm.
could do water collection off of them as well.
Right. So
to give water.
to give water, and that would water them, where this big stuff would be for watering the garden,
Right.
watering down our dust, because our dust is just ridiculous.
Terrible.
You know, and if we're able to run some sprinklers on, that just keeps that other wild stuff growing, and it's all brown right now, and they'll eat it. They're fine. They will go through and eat it. Brush clear, so your fire
You're not
hazards.
saluting me.
You're not saluting me. Good. It's the wrong hand. So anyway, they'll continue it. So that's the goal for that, and then we're growing. But we were looking at things that we could possibly grow in our garden, and so the fodder beets came up.
Yeah.
Now we're looking more into these, and I was reading about them. Are 10 to 15 pound beets a beet. They're humongous, so they grow huge.
And in the past, that's what they used for feed. That and turnips.
So I'm pretty sure that when you get beet meal, so they still put this in feeds.
Yeah.
They're just growing it commercially. So it's not, you got to have a space. We're planning a space of some row gardens. Kale is another one that grew really well for us this year with not a lot of water. So we could grow fodder beets, we could grow kale. You found a corn?
The kale gets really big. Yeah. There was a corn, I think it's called grazing corn, and it produces pretty quickly. And the concept that I read was you just let the animals out into the field, and the animals can eat off of the field, off of the stalks, off of the corn, and you literally just...
That would worry me, because they can ingest too much corn and get sick. So I would say they could eat the stalks. You'd still have to pull the corn off and ration that.
Oh, could be.
And then let them in and let them have the stalks. That makes sense.
I thought it was pretty darn interesting that there was something
super interesting. So, and the fodder beets, because we're planning on raising pigs throughout the winter. So apparently I lost my thing that I was on. Okay, so I found forage kale. I was looking up some things that you could grow, and purchasing the seed and how much did that cost. So there's a rapeseed or rapseed, I don't know, dwarf Essex rapeseed, $7. I'm assuming this is a pound. Oilseed radish, $30 a pound. Forage kale, $9.50 a pound. So you buy a pound of that, that's a cut and come again crop. So as far as and feed immediately. So that's not really something we're going to overwinter, but for the colony, do we want to shift so you're not in the sun? Okay. We could show them the trash cans.
You guys want to see our trash?
They're in the shade. This was in the shade. So the kale would be great for our colony rabbits, because we could go in and forage that, chunk it in there.
And you had talked about what are the big southern greens that get really big?
I could have told you if you didn't ask me.
No, Swiss chard.
Swiss chard, yeah.
Swiss chard, those kinds of things.
Here's a brassica blend food plot mix, $33 a pound, and a winter forage brassica is $299. I don't know, and so I'm assuming that Winfred. I don't know anything about any of those, but when I was just trying to Google, how could we purchase these for the cheapest amount of money? Because you would want to grow a large amount, like you would want to grow a large row of them.
So the difference between field corn and sweet corn, obviously sweet corn's more for us, but the field corn is the one that's specifically for animals that happens to grow faster.
So I wonder why it's specifically for animals. Like, why are they... One, it grows faster, I get that.
What's the difference between field corn and sweet corn? I'll get to you. Keep talking, I'll let you know.
I had to drink pumpkin spice coffee this morning because they were out of my kind that I like. So, setting up and preparing a plot that we could just grow the beets, the fodder beets. They're 8 inches, so they're huge. So you have to have 8-inch rows. 8 inches between your rows is what it was said, and they'll grow together.
Wow.
Like, yes, so they're
That's
huge, and you do need a cold cellar to store them, or I would assume. So this is something that I wanted to do, chaos gardening. And I read about a guy a long time ago, like 2006. He did this for his pigs. So he just threw all of his extra seeds in this one plotted area, kept it watered, grew all the things, and then whenever he was raising pigs through the winter, he just threw them in there. And they rooted everything up. They ate everything that was left over. They basically free fed themselves throughout the winter on that, because they'll eat until they're full and then they'll stop.
So here's the answer. There's a dent in what they call the cow corn or dent corn. There's a reason it's called dent corn. There's a dent or dimple in the crown of each individual corn kernel, and it has high starch and low sugar, which means it's not sweet and juicy like the corn you buy from the supermarket or farmers markets.
Right. Richard's here. It could get loud.
It says it does. They do use some dent corn extra for like chips, cornmeal, and mesa, but traditionally it's meant just for animals.
Well, I know we're going to experiment next growing season. So next year we're gonna prepare for this, and I do think we're gonna try that, because that's, how long did that take to grow?
I think it was
75 days.
70 days.
Yeah.
I think it was 70, and the other one was the sweet corn was like 90 days.
Right, which is really good for our area here. And
Yeah.
we don't eat a lot of corn. We really try to do, corn makes us feel gross. Like we've kind of, anything that has corn in it, we just don't feel well after eating it. So,
but that could be the processing, because I think when we had corn the other day,
fresh corn on the cob.
I didn't really notice anything.
Well, maybe we'll do a small patch of
sweet corn just for us.
Sweet corn just for us.
The stalks could go to the animals.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's another thing that could go easily to the rabbits. So our rabbits don't get to forage. But we do have a few that are running loose. And we do put out a small bit of grain for them, because we want to keep them up here. We don't want them to really take off. We want to be able to capture them back up. So, but they're doing lovely. And they did lovely all winter long. The couple that were loose all winter long, they did come in for a little bit of grain, but they foraged in the winter. So, they dig under, they burrow under to keep themselves warm. And we were talking, there's got to probably be roots they're getting to, which gives you minerals, gives them the minerals, gives them the stuff that they need. But the rabbits looked really good all winter long that were running loose, that stuck around here.
Yeah.
So, that being said, there's something to that. We've again been trained in this, okay. So when I was reading, back in the day, a homestead cow probably gave you 4,000 gallons of milk through the milking season, where now those cows, they're being fed for high yield production, and they're being bred more for high yield production. So they get between 18 to 22,000 gallons of milk a year. So that's for commercial milking. So we don't need to feed our animals like that, because we don't need that much. We don't need the cow's body to go through that much, or goat's body, whichever we have.
And back in the day, they would feed one particular crop. Like when we were researching, they did like turnips, for example, and that's all they got. So they didn't have like a balanced diet. And if we're giving them all of these different things, plants off of the ground, stuff that we're growing, they're getting extra vitamins and minerals.
And I could
help with that.
Yeah, I could understand that, because so if you're doing a rotational crop, like each year you do a specific, because you want to confuse the bugs is what you want to do. It's that same thing. So growing beets one year, growing turnips one year, growing in that same plot, you're confusing the bugs, you're confusing that cycle, so you don't have, the destruction of the crop by the bugs. So that makes total sense that they would just grow, like one. But I think we're going to really, where this goat barn is behind us, that's actually going to be taken down and moved. And this is going to be part of the garden area. And I think it's going to be our row gardens, that this is what we specifically are growing.
And we've been talking about growing like squashes, pumpkins for feeding the animals.
Yeah. Because we would use a very small portion of that. the rest of it could be for the animals.
Yeah.
You know, the biggest thing that we're going to have to figure out is a root cellar. So maybe that's something that we need to start researching. You guys send us some links to some food storage, food cellars that you've seen. We do have a nice hill behind the
Really cool
the
to
tiny
do that.
house, and digging into that is a doable thing. So that's something that I would really like to do. It's not too far from, you know, the animals,
Right.
because you definitely wouldn't want to get too far from the animals. But I could just see pushing a sled up to that, because we do get snow, pushing a sled up to that, filling that full, dragging it over to where the critters are, and you know,
Being able to
feeding.
feed them off of the land would be amazing.
You know, there's a real big possibility. So as far as the recycle reuse, is these big freezers that die out and people just chunk. You know, those are insulated.
Talked
Those
about
are
that a lot.
filling those full of the feed, and then you could have it right next to the animal, so you wouldn't have to drag it. You know, and
Because
and
we
feed
went to
full
the
of-
dump, we go to the dump, and you see refrigerator after refrigerator after refrigerator.
Yeah, there's usually a minimum 5.
And you think about it, if you take that refrigerator and you turn it on its side, you know, then you have like a cooler that you can lift the
Mhm.
lid and.
Yeah, and the only way our things froze in the freezer last year is if we propped the door open.
Yeah.
If we did not prop the door open, the meat did not stay frozen in there.
Yeah.
So, you know, using that as the test, you know, we actually, this is funny, in Texas, we kept our animal grain in a huge broken freezer, one of the big old-fashioned ones, and it could fit all of our grain, you know, for 6 months. We bought grain 6 months. We had 3 horses, so it was pretty much the only livestock we had, but we bought that for them. So, you know, that is a real doable idea. That is something that, you know, even maybe if those were filled, the rest went into the cellar, and then, you know, it was like, oh, we're getting low, we need to pull from the
Right.
cellar and bring it back in. So that is an option. But I know we're going to do the fodder beets, number one, just because I think they're really cool and I definitely want to try growing them. I don't know, and you guys may know, because we were trying to figure out cut and come again. If you guys don't know what I mean by that, that means like the kale, you can trim off your lower leaves and it will continue to grow. So you don't kill the plant by doing that. So we were trying to figure out, because beet greens are so good for the animals. Now we could dry those out, put it part of the hay. So it could still go for that winter crop. But we were thinking, is this something that we could trim off some of the leaves, feed to the rabbits,
Right.
take to our colony? Because we definitely want the meat, the animals that are going to be meat for us later, food for us. We want them to eat healthy. We want that to be very healthy meat. So between kale, Swiss chard, some of the better lettuces, you know, you could definitely do. But I was wondering with that, because that would be such a big crop if we could go in and just take little bits here and there.
Yeah.
If I'm not seeing on my beets that I'm growing right now, which are basically regular beets, you know, they have their initial leaves. I'm not seeing any more leaves come in. Where like with kale, it will continue to grow and continue to do, even if you don't clip off your bottom. Your leaves will just get this big.
We also, you know, you notice that when you cut down specific kinds of trees or what have you, and the stumps there, and then things start growing back out of it.
So we have what's called a weed maple.
And you
That's
can
what they
use
call it.
those leaves and cut those continually back. And the theory is you could save those for winter and feed your animals those throughout the winter as well.
And so we were kind of talking about that this morning, and I was like, well, yeah, we could also feed pine and fir, because that's a dewormer, and so the animals just want it in the wintertime. And so picking trees that you know you're going to cut down for firewood,
Yes.
you could start cutting them and feeding the limbs. So now you have a de-limbed tree. You drop it in the wintertime, you could get the tops over and feed that to the animals. And now you have your tree down for the winter, you know, for next season's firewood.
Even this morning in the stuff that I cut and I fed to the rabbits and the goats, they went for the pine needles, one of the first things. So they like it and they need it.
Yes.
So
yeah, they're definitely craving it. So that's that's a thought process as far as tagging trees that you know you want to come down.
So that tree has lots of purposes then.
Yeah.
Firewood and feed.
And then looking at, so they have what are called firewood trees that grow very fast. And so this is something we've talked about before,
Yes.
as far as planting, because we're going to be replanting trees. We've taken out quite a few for the build, and more will be coming down for the builds. But then we'll be bringing in trees to mill. So we're going to get to a point where we're not really going to cut down, but we do want to grow our own firewood trees, which sounds funny whenever you're on a piece of property that has this many trees, but we are on a mountain and we do not have the heavy equipment to cut something down on the lower part of the mountain and bring it up. So until I can figure that out, a giant winch on the front of a truck, and you attach your truck from the front and the back, and you can drag up a log, that's one way, but then you have to be able to get your truck to that, and still you can only go so far. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but they have these things called firewood trees, and they also use them for wind blocking. They grow very fast. You plant 5 rows of them, 1 row every year, and then you start rotating around and taking that 5-year-old tree down, because they grow, like I said, really, they also take a lot of water. So if you're in a drought area, it's not a good tree for you. But then you can start cutting those down and burning them for firewood, replace that row, and every year you have a 5-year tree, so that, and you're constantly replacing them or whatever. But
I think that concept's really good, and especially if you're on a property where you have neighbors where they can kind of see you. You also have kind of a built-in privacy fence as well.
Yeah.
Wind block, privacy fence, firewood.
Yeah. Because they do. They're very ugly trees. They're not pretty trees. They're very ugly. I've seen them where people have let them grow for a really long time, and they have limbs very low. It is a softer wood, so it's not a preferred wood to burn, because they burn fast, kind of like our pine does. But as far as growing something for heat, that is the one that I've seen suggested. But back to the growing the food, back to the topic, since I squirrel all over the place. But that is part of it. That is a food, and it's serving another purpose. But it's not just the root, because it was turnips, beets. Potatoes was another one, but you have to cook them. So if you're looking for a non hands-off kind of product, then it was the beets, it was the turnips. Those could all be eaten raw.
Carrots.
But our potatoes grew really good this year,
and they were really easy,
super easy.
Didn't take
water. Any water. So
it's all that God's provided as far as water.
That is a real thought, and as far as because we haul our water in, so that's something that we may put in next year, just specifically for feed.
I wonder how long stuff like Swiss chard stores, or
in the root cellar it sells. Mostly people put covers over them, and you can continue to have them all winter long. Yeah. So that's usually what you do, big row covers. We get a lot of snow, so we would have to do a pretty substantial row cover that the snow could not crush everything, but then you just kind of dig them out and pick them. That's usually, carrots are the same. Carrots actually were not made for people. They were made as animal feed.
Yeah.
It's sweet, so we'll, this is my very first year I've ever been successful with carrots.
Wasn't originally for just like horses?
Yeah. So it was funny when my uncle, I was like 13, and my uncle's from Germany, and he was like, when he moved to the United States, and uncle through marriage, and he was like, I can't believe you guys eat pig food, because we eat corn here. Like, that's not a thing, I guess, in Germany. They don't eat corn. That's pig food. He was completely like, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. So with the corn, with the beets, with the turnips, maybe some potatoes. I think the potatoes, we have to have a root cellar, but then we could dry out the tops, not of the potatoes. That's poisonous. You can't feed that to them. But we could dry out the tops of probably the turnip greens, because that's a real thing. Turnip greens, collard greens, kale, beet greens, Swiss chard greens. That can all be dried up and be like a hay.
Yeah.
Mixed in with the hay. So they're getting even more because
throw some pine in there.
Throw some pine in there. Throw some, hopefully we can get the grass growing and be able to hay that. We'll see what everybody's haying. I think we get 2 cuttings here.
When I heard about the size of those beets, I was like impressed, and I'm like,
it's like the size. It's like the whole size, bigger than your head.
That will totally fill animals up as far as giving them enough to fill their stomachs and make them feel like they've got enough food. I mean, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it was 2%, 2.5% of body weight is what you're looking for in feed, is what I was reading. So if those are 15 pounds, one of those would feed our whole group. Like, so, and you have to think about, so the nutrition in that, bless you,
excuse me,
the nutrition in that has to be, well, they're using it for animal feed. You see beet pulp. So that is a real thing that goes into feed. Corn is in feed. Our sweet feeds have oats, barley, corn. I don't think there's any beets in there, but
I wonder if those are high in sugar, like the beets they make sugar out of. Curiosity.
Yeah, that would be interesting. But you could, if you really wanted to, buy some bulk oats and some bulk barley, mix it in with the stuff that you're doing, soak it, even warm it up in the wintertime, and then you're giving them warm feed.
It's like for chickens, they really like oats with bacon grease.
Yeah, I used to make oatmeal every morning, and I didn't have a lot of chickens, so it's really easy to do when you don't have a lot. And I would make a bowl of oatmeal for the chickens, and I would take it out there, and they would just go nuts. And it was nice and warm and hot, and it helps. Hi, Richard. Richard wants chickens.
For those of you new, Richard, his last name is Cranium.
Yeah. And he loves us, and so we're his herd, his flock.
He does not have chicken ladies.
He sits here and he crows when we talk.
He's funny because he kind of, we're going a little bit off, but he's kind of funny because he, when the baby goats were born, he like stayed with them for days.
Yeah.
And that was his new flock.
Yeah. And he's only here because we think he's comical. That being said, we are going to have quail. So he's probably going to want to try to be part of the quail group. And we will be getting him some chickens, hopefully next year. He's got a lot to say now. Lot to say, don't you, buddy? So those are the things that we're going to experiment with. I'd be real interested to know if this is something you guys have thought about. My concern is the cost of feed is absolutely ridiculous. And being self-sufficient, this is something that if you're going to be self-sufficient, and that is a goal of yours, you kind of have to think about that. And if you don't have big flat property, hence the name Richard Cranium, that you can release your animals on and let them, go for it. Or for instance, us, we don't have a long growing season. We have 7 months of winter, usually. 6 to 7 months. So we have to provide feed for half of the year for our animals. Right. One way or another, we either have to purchase it or we have to give them access to things. Now, the end goal is to have some really big fenced in areas. We're not going to ever have a huge amount of animals. Maybe we might add a milk cow. I've always wanted a miniature Jersey cow, so that may be added. But there's quite a few sections that we can section off, rotate them through to where they're not having to graze in the grazing area, except for at night. Put them in there. And actually, I want to lock them into the barn. We do have a cougar in this area. We do have predators in this area, so locking them in the barn. He is on a roll. Is a real thing for us, especially in the wintertime. But being able to move them out and around all the rest of the seasons. We have huge amount of areas. We would not have to supply them with feed at all except for treats to get them to really come to you and that kind of stuff. And then actively growing these huge roots. Now we have to figure out how much we need to grow. And honestly, would want to have some kind of drip irrigation system on them, so you're not having to be out there hand watering. The potatoes didn't need any water, so that was amazing.
We do have a 1,000-gallon swimming pool that the ducks are in that we're going to use as irrigation, so to speak.
Right, putting that on a drip. And I think that's going to go into a drip irrigation situation. And then we're just going to constantly be filling that pool. So it's fertilized water. It should be more than enough. It's pond water. And if we can get some fish in there that the ducks wouldn't eat, we would then have the fish.
And we had talked about getting maybe some fish that we could eat, like tilapia, because there are some.
Yeah. Yeah, so we had talked about that. I don't know. And I was thinking about this last night of adding more pools up that thing, because then because we do plan on letting the ducks raise out babies that then are for the freezer camp. So we have 3 girls. You know, we could end up with about 15-ish baby ducks, I would think, that would get to be raised out, and being able to move them in other pools, you know, and run that water.
That would be cool, because then we could rotate them as well, because, you know.
Well, and if we have the water collection and we have 20,000 gallons of water, we could easily spend, you know, one day filling up all of those pools. Say we had 5. That's 5,000 gallons up here. 1, fire safety. 2, when you increase your garden, we're adding fruits, we're adding berries, we're adding fruit trees, we're adding, you know, more stuff that we're trying to grow, that kind of thing. And we do get drought here in the summertime. We haven't had rain in over, I think, a month now.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not like you can just allow the rain to water these things. They will have to be watered. So,
but if you do your rain collection correctly, then you get a ton of water.
We have 2 big rain months. I think it's October and June are considered. If you look at the annual fall, I think those are our 2 big months. But if you think about it, if we have 5,000 gallons up here, up top, and then 20,000 gallons there, I mean, I don't think we would go through 5,000 gallons in a month. I mean, maybe we could, if we were trying to water the grass for the hay.
Right.
You know, you're gonna be out some money one way or other, depending upon where you live. So, you know, it truly changes with where you live. In Texas, my winter was very short. Washington, the winter was quite a bit shorter than it is here. So here is a very long season. So, you know, there's a whole different thought process on that than, say, those particular areas.
Well, and the key to that water retention too in the ground for your plants is doing things like the mulching. And so once again, that's taking, the animals are providing that, you're putting that on the garden, which is then providing for feed for the animals.
Exactly. So you're watering less.
Yeah.
You're keeping the ground cool, like right now, keeping the ground cooler and not having as much dust and whatever kind of stuff. So, you know, that's basically been our thought process for this week. Actively, you know, let me know if you guys have a plan, if you have livestock or you've thought about it or what you're doing. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had because of the cost of feed. There's, I don't know, there's somebody that said they did grew out meat birds, and it ended up being like $15 a bird this year versus normally it's like $8 to $9. So it's quite a bit more. And my goal here on the homestead is to allow my animals, let's just say I had a flock of chickens, allow the chickens to hatch out babies, raise those babies, and then the bulk of the animals are processed in the fall, and I overwinter the smallest amounts. That is my goal. That is self-sustainability. That's how it is. You know, and then we'll be canning and growing vegetables and preserving feed. So I think that's our conversation for next week, is preserving food. You know, what are you guys doing? That kind of thing. So I kind of think that's going to be we're looking for some different alternatives to sugar. because that's not something we can grow here or want to grow here. So, you know, that is, and we're putting more money into structures so that we can grow year round. We're planning on doing a self-heating, self-cooling greenhouse here. I'm hoping it'll be next year. I'm really hoping for that, because in fact I would put that up before I put the big house up, because I think it's that important.
Once the barn's up and
barn is this season, so hopefully next season we're able to do more than just that. But you know, that's digging down 10 feet into the ground, putting some piping in there so that it heat and cools the air inside that piping, and then you're rotating the air in your greenhouse with just little 12-volt fans. And you can grow in Nebraska all year long, so we could definitely grow here all year long. And so that also, we would be able to feed. We would be able to feed the animals. You know, kale, the cut and come again. We could kale, a Swiss chard, all of those things, and they could be fresh.
Yeah.
So we could have some dried, some fresh. Obviously, those fodder beets you wouldn't want to grow inside there, or potatoes. I think it would take up too much room.
Space.
But you could definitely. We're only going to overwinter 6 rabbits. You know, so, you know, right now we have a ton. You see them, we're growing out babies. But so 6 over winter isn't a huge amount. I mean, we could go in and get one of those big old kale leaves, chunk it in. That's probably enough for
those
one
will
rabbit.
be our breeders.
Yes.
5 mamas and a boy.
Exactly. So, you know, just that entire, it's not, when I was in Texas, I didn't have to really think about it. I had grass all year long except for a couple of months. It was very cheap to get a round bale of hay, to free feed hay to everybody. Here it's not. Here I could get a round bale, 1,200 pound round bale of hay for $50 there delivered, and here it's $75 for 500 pounds round bale. It's good hay. I'm not saying it's not good hay. It's good hay, but you know, the cost is just so much more.
And it's
expensive.
just going to get worse.
It really is. And you know, we've got all this stuff grown up that's now dead. That's a fire hazard. You know, using the animals to clear that. You're not purchasing gas for equipment. You're not, you know, polluting the air. You're not any of those things. You don't have to work. It's a no work situation. All you have to do is move your animals. Once you get your infrastructure up, once you get your fences up, and you've made those committed areas for them that you could rotate your animals through, they can clean out from underneath. They could, you know, and that's all a cut and come again situation.
Now I have a question. So let's say we were to put sheep in an area that was as overgrown as the one that's behind you guys, so you can't see it, but would they really make much of a dent in that?
Let me see. I'll show them what it is. This is where editor Heather comes in and shows you guys what the heck we're talking about.
And so my question is, would the sheep actually take care of something like that, or is that more of like a goat thing?
So it depends upon what you're doing with your sheep. If you were trying to take fiber off of your sheep, you would want to put what they call sheep pajamas on them that protects all of these little seeds from getting into the fiber, and it just destroys your fiber. So if you could get and they're breathable.
But they would eat that.
They would eat that, yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
that was my question.
They would eat that.
Okay.
I mean, I look at that and I'm like, but you know, we're not going to do. I do spin, I do crochet, I do those things. I'm not planning on doing that with these sheep. So right now,
we don't have the time for that right now.
Eventually, I probably will. Right now, I am absolutely not. So, in fact, we'll probably use sheep wool for insulation in the goat barns and stuff like that. We'll start shoving it in the walls and stuff.
Reuse, recycle.
That's what they did back in the day. So yeah, I would absolutely send them in there. And the bird is so funny.
Crazy.
I would absolutely send them in there and have them clear that up, along with way down here. Even though that's dead, that looks dead, they would still eat that.
So that being said, sheep are more respectful of those like these.
Sheep are a lot pickier. They are
as far as food.
Yeah, they are.
But they're not going to knock down your fence like a goat
no,
will.
They're great. So goats are foragers. They like all the things with the leaves on the trees and these weed maples that are growing up, they would just go for all of that. Sheep tend to like more grass, so where goats less like the grass and they more like the foraging off of trees and leaves and stuff, which makes them perfect with putting them together. And usually they'll run sheep behind cattle because sheep will eat what cows won't.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, and then you also confuse the life cycle of the worms with doing that. So that is, and then they run chickens in there too, because then the chickens are busting up the cow poo, the cow manure. So usually your sheep and fertilizing and all of those things. So we had the chickens in a very small area. We didn't like it, and so made the decision we actually rehomed our flock, and we'll be replacing them, especially if we get a cow, because rotating them around behind cattle would be really good to disrupting the life cycle of the worms and the flies and the bots and all that kind of stuff that grow up in cattle manure. So that is our extended plan here. Putting up bigger fences, making bigger pastures so that these guys can graze our little mountainside.
Free food.
Yeah, all summer long, spring, fall. Well, spring we're a little cold, so summer and fall is really when we have I feel like we have a very short spring here.
We do. We have a short fall too, I feel like.
We do.
Because I feel like it's summer, and then you have maybe 2 weeks of fall, and then it's cold.
When did we warm up and lose all of our snow? It was May, wasn't it?
The beginning of first week or the second week of May.
Yeah. So May, June, July, August, September, October, we can get snow. So that's what we have. So 6 months. We need 6 months that we can let them forage out and about, where we can spend 6 months growing what we need for winter time for them. Yeah. So growing those specific feeds. If you guys come across a seed that you think we should try, we have a very short growing season. You just kind of heard it. And especially if we're starting something from seed. I don't know what the growing season is on those fodder beets. Did you look that up?
No.
I did not either. Hold one moment while we do that. Well, one of us gets it. But that's where kale grows pretty quick. Spinach, you could definitely do spinach. So things that we also could eat, they could be eating, at the same time. And more of that that stuff I'm thinking more for the rabbits. They don't, your iceberg lettuce, no go. You don't feed those to rabbits, but you can feed the other ones that have nutritional value. Iceberg lettuce does not have any nutritional value. It has a very high water content, and it actually can kill them.
It says cool temperatures, 55 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Harvest month, late spring, or during the fall months.
It doesn't give you a day, like the date of growth, like 70 days or something.
Let's see.
So that's I love beets, but I'm wondering how sweet these are. Like, I feel like they should still be pretty sweet, because you definitely want to add a little bit of sugar in their diet for winter for keeping them warm. That's why they put molasses into sweet feed. I used to only feed sweet feed in the wintertime, and because of the flies, that if they're eating a lot of molasses, then the flies are bad.
Come on. I get really terrible service sometimes, so it's thinking. Samson's doing some weird things. He's been doing his thing again.
I don't know.
Here we go. 100 days.
Okay, so that's a very long...
Full sun. Sprouts 14 to 21 days. But 100 days for harvest.
Which works if we have a later winter.
Ideal temp 50 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost hardy.
So that's good.
And this is a gargantuan beet. And there's actually a picture. So editor Heather may be able to pop that up there as well. But it is really, look at the size of that thing.
Yeah, they're ginormous. They're like 10 to 15 pounds. That's huge.
So,
So to me, that would be something that would really be really good to let pigs root up.
yeah.
You know, if root up a certain amount, but then just kind of let the pigs in and let them have at that area. And then they're rooting up, they're self-feeding, they're self-regulating their food.
You know, once we get big and we're done with all of our stuff, we're going to really maybe talk about doing this thing that they say the giant roots are also used for a game called mangold hurling. The sport is still played in the UK today. You harvest the roots when small and tender, blah, blah, blah.
That's hilarious.
Totally gonna do that.
That is hilarious. All right, I think we're probably going to be heading over to the mill. So if you guys have not checked out Cause We Can Farms, we're doing a lot of building there. We're building our infrastructure here on the farm. And I hope you enjoy watching that and our chats. We really love expanding the community, our community in homesteading, no matter where you are. So we really appreciate you watching and sharing.
We are also doing some foraging, so
Yes.
On occasion we'll do some walkabouts on the property as well, but that's over on Waking Up Country. So.
Yes. So you want to go over there and check that out. Because we've been learning a ton about what the property offers us that we do not have to water, take care of, do anything about. In fact, I need to go pick some St. John's wort for Jennifer's birthday present today. But have a great week. We appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out with us. Bye.
God bless.